Hello everyone. So the plan is to talk about blogging from the perspective of a programmer, assuming you want to write a blog for other programmers. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Andrzej Krzywda. I'm the CEO of Arkansas. Quite a lot of Arkansas work relies on having a blog. And before I started Arkansas, I was a programmer, and I'm still a programmer, but I was a programmer working for other companies, and I started blogging at some point, and I learned how to blog quickly. And right now blogging is not a huge problem for me. So at some point, over time I wrote, I don't know, probably over 100 of blog posts, all of them targeting programmers, and I was documenting some programming knowledge. I also I published a book called Blogging for Busy Programmers, and in this book I help people how to unblock and start blogging for programmers. So this slide is basically a summary of this book, and there will be lots of tips. And feel free to add questions and ask questions on the chat. The first thing I want to ask is to ask you if you have already a blog, or if you have attempted to have a blog, or why are you attending this live video? So what's your problem with blogging? This way I can I know how I can help you. And I've helped already quite a number of programmers, including the Arkansas team, how to blog more often, but also how to blog without spending too much time. Okay, having this introduction, I think we can start and actually go with the content. Okay, I think it's technically working. So the typical problems that I see among programmers who want to blog, because if you don't want to blog, then obviously probably this video is not of much help for you. Probably you have tried blogging, and maybe you have published 2 blog posts over time, but this is not really your ambition, right? So probably you would like to have more. Probably you have bought a domain for a blog, or maybe not, because you're stuck choosing which domain to have. Maybe you, as a typical programmer, this is the sin number 1 among programmers. Before you start blogging, you probably try to write your own blogging engine. So you don't trust WordPress, you don't trust GitHub pages. You need to implement your own engine, which results in many nights of interesting work on the blogging engine, but it means you still procrastinated on the actual writing the blogs. Probably you are a perfectionist, so you have some drafts of your blog posts, but you don't feel they're ready, so you are not publishing them, and they're waiting to be published one day. If that's you, then let me know. Maybe, and that's with the unblocking as a blogger, it's actually similar if you start for the first time, but some of the people, including me, they start blogging, they blog for 3 years quite regularly, and then they have a break for 1 year, and it's really difficult to get back. You have what is called writer's blockade. So for some reason you just can't get over it, and you don't blog. So this is a blogging blockade overall. And there are many, so if you are in this blogging blockade, or before you ever started, or after you started but then got stuck, there are several stages. So in those stages you need to go through sometimes many times during your career. And why blogging is useful for you? Probably you have your reasons. Maybe you want to build your brand. Maybe you know that, for example, if you apply to Arkansas, we want to check your blog. So some companies require this, and maybe you just think it's good for the community, it's good for the world that you will share some knowledge, or maybe it's for you, it's like a learning attempt. So this way you hope to learn something new as a blog. But most likely it's a combination of all of this. So the first stage is like unblocking yourself, and I think many of us assume that if you publish a blog post, or if I publish a blog post and I click publish, and suddenly like hundreds of people will start reading this. And the truth is no one cares. and before you start promoting the blog post, no one is reading this. So one idea how to unblock yourself is just hit publish, because that's the difficult part, but don't go into the promoting mode and just don't share the link to anyone. It means that if someone uses RSS, but no one uses RSS nowadays, they will read it, but no one else. For those of you who joined later, a question to you: please share what is the reason you're watching this video. What would you like to learn about blogging, or what is your current stage of blogging career? Okay, the first stage is also to know who is your audience. This helps, because if you imagine who are you writing to, it's much easier to unblock yourself. And there are possibly several techniques how to approach this, and on one blog you can mix all of those. There is nothing to worry about. You can write to one audience and then switch to another. Only after you have, I don't know, 50 blog posts, you can try to separate several ideas. So the first audience that you can imagine is to blog to the past you. So write to you in the past, maybe you 2 years ago, or you 5 years ago. Okay, I see some questions are coming, but just I don't know where's the place to see them in my setup. Anyway, so that's one thing. The another thing is to write to the current you. So you basically just learned something, or you just did something today at work. Explain it to yourself in a written form. So in a way, this will be like a tutorial for you for the future. So it's a way, it's not only the current you, but it's the future you. Now, after I've been blogging for many years, I quite often go to Google, I type something, because I often forget, for example, how to access the hash in Ruby. And I go there and I go to Google and I type the key phrases, and then I end up in my own blog post from 5 years ago. So in a way, I'm helping myself for the future. So this is the egoistic approach. So that was the past you, the current/future you, and then there is the current team, for example. So without thinking about the whole world, just imagine, because your teammates might be friendly towards you. If you write a blog post, they will read it. So maybe you want to share something with them. Maybe you want to teach what you just did, and it's something that you can easily share. For example, it's not behind the NDA and it can be public, but still it can be targeting your team. Or maybe it's to your future team. For me, it's very useful when we as RKNC join existing teams. We often mix teams, so we append the team. It's good that we have lots of our experience explained as a blog post, so that whenever we have this discussion, hey, hello team, how do we do this and this here? I can always say, hey, in the past at RKNC we did this, and here how it's documented. Maybe we can consider doing this in this project. So that's another idea. So that was okay. You in the past, you in the current or in the future, and then is your current team or the future team. Then you can think a bit about a bit wider. Who is your audience? So for example, you can think, okay, I'm a Ruby programmer, so I can write to other Ruby programmers. I'm also a Rails programmer. So you can choose. Maybe you're a JavaScript programmer. Just be clear. It's useful to be clear, who is my audience. Once you know the audience, you can easily find the places on the internet where people like you or people in your audience, they gather together and they discuss stuff. So for example, for Ruby, it would be Reddit Ruby or subreddit Rails. There is RubyFlow, there is Twitter. Lots of people Ruby people are on Twitter. There are GitHub repositories for popular projects. There is Hacker News if you're targeting a wider audience of programmers. So there's lots of, you get the idea, right? And you can go there and see how who they actually are, what are their typical problems. It will help you later to decide what to blog about. Yeah, and Mirek in the chat writes, the ones who still use RSS are bots. Exactly. Milko says, me in the past or future. Good idea. Thanks. That's good to know. Okay, so now the next, so now we kind of decided who we can block to, right? So the next stage is where to block. As I already mentioned, don't write your own engine because you will spend a lot of time. You will have programming fun, but you will still not achieve your blogging goals. So don't go for implementing your blogging engine. I know you are able to do it in all the fancy new frameworks with all the fancy new front-end frameworks, using JavaScript or not, using whatever is the current Elixir, Go, fancy language. You can do it, but you will just procrastinate, and your goal is to block, not to write new software. You're writing software every day. Maybe for the future you can have more than one blog, but that's really for people who are already experienced. So for example, as Arkansas, we have the Arkansas blog. I have my own personal blog, which I kind of abandoned, but it's still there. We have a Medium page for Arkansas. We sometimes kind of blog on the Arkansas fan page. By the way, if you're here, you don't like the Arkansas fan page yet. Maybe it's a good moment. But I would postpone it to later. If you think you have so many ideas that you need to target many audiences, maybe that's a good idea to split at some point. But don't do it too early. Like focus on one thing for now. The existing solutions for blogging, they kind of change over time. At Arkansas, we use Nanook, which was okay. After we achieved 200 blog posts or 300 blog posts, it did become a little bit of a problem from the performance perspective, but from the performance perspective, because the local compilation time of all the blog posts was a problem. There is a specific way of handling images, but the actual blog is then, as the result is actually a static HTML page. So we can handle any traffic. But again, don't think about traffic too much. At the beginning, you have really no chance to get a bigger traffic. So nowadays, it's really difficult to get the attention of the people. I would go for GitHub pages probably right now. That sounds like a safe choice. Just choose whatever template you like or go with the default and start blogging. You can go for... When I started in 2006, I went for Blogger, so the Google platform. I think it's still there. I don't think it's still very fancy, but it's okay as a start. So whatever. Medium at some moment was a good platform, but then they had some issues with the payment kind of gateways. Probably Jekyll. Okay, so you can find your blogging platform. This is easy. And then the next thing is how to call your blog, and many people struggle on that. I started simply. I just started a blog and I called it Andrzej on Software. Just very generic thing. And this wasn't really original. There was this very popular blog called Joel on Software, by Joel Polski. So I just followed this this way and I borrowed this style. Another one would be andrzejkrzyda.com, so first name, surname.com. Maybe your name on software is a good thing. Maybe it's your company name.com. So, but just don't spend too much time on this before you actually write many blog posts. It's always possible to change. You are a technical person, you know it's possible to change. So that's the domain. There's also the blog name, which can be different from the domain. It can be the same. Then there's a blog headline. I don't care. At the beginning, I just say it's Andrzej on Software, and the headline said thoughts on software. How original I was, right? At Arkansas, we just say you're reading a blog by Arkansas or something like this. It actually matters less that we usually think. So put whatever and then start. No random person goes to your blog and will evaluate you as a person by whatever you have there. Okay, let's switch to the actual useful stuff in terms of how to blog quickly. So the main problem after you decide what's your audience, where to blog, is the time problem. And this is the main reason for many programmers not to blog or not to blog too often. Many people think blogging requires like 5 hours for a blog post. And for your first blog post, it might be like that. But hopefully I will show you some techniques how to make it quicker. The first technique I want to share with you is a technique called start from the middle. which is a technique where, let's say, you decided you want to explain what you did today, right? More or less, what was your work today, because you think it was a use. So probably you work on one specific feature, you wrote some code, you wrote some tests, you maybe did some research on how to implement this feature. So you can start with a structure which is just 4 bullet points or 4 sentences. And you can, the way I like to start with a blog post is to start with, so, well, today I was working on feature this and this on our project. The way I approached this was I first needed to understand what are the possible scenarios, so I listed those scenarios. Then the next sentence is, then I decided on my testing strategy, so my testing strategy was this and this and this. And then the 4th sentence is, or the 4th bullet point is, and my implementation, at the beginning I thought my implementation would be like this, but then I went for such implementation. So 4 sentences or 4 bullet points, and in a way they already tell the whole story. They are not useful, but at least you can start with the most important structure. And that's what I call that this blog post is shippable from the beginning. So you don't start with a big introduction of who you are and what's your life about. You're very specific, and you try to capture the story from the beginning to the end. And then, so that's the shippable technique. And then you can connect it with the idea of timeboxing. So with timeboxing, you say, I have only 1 hour for this blog post, and I really can't afford more because it's a difficult time. I have work, I have family, I have kids. I can't spend more than 1 hour on this blog post, or maybe 30 minutes. I sometimes write a blog post within 10 minutes. So if you combine timeboxing with this idea of shippable, so that you capture the whole story, it means you set the alarm for 1 hour, and you type, and you try to extend the first bullet point, then you extend the second, the third, the fourth. Again, don't try to go all in to the first bullet point, because again, you will end up with a huge introduction, but not the whole story. So just focus on which part is most important, what is the actual thing to say to your audience. Maybe it's the test scenarios in this feature that you thought were interesting to share. Maybe it's the way you implemented it, or maybe how you thought it would be implemented. So there's always something. It's a story, and then you show some code. By the way, sharing code in a blog post is a great idea, because you immediately start with something. So that's another technique. Just paste some of the code, obviously the one that you can share, or paste the code and tweak it so that it becomes something that you can share legally. So shippable, timeboxing, paste, start from the middle, and use some code. And that's another technique. So I told you about the start from the middle consisting of bullet points. Another one is to just start with pasting the code, the one that you think is the most important for this blog post, and only then add the narration. We'll come to the example of kinds of the blog posts later, but this is already, it should be enough. One of the blockers for many people is that they imagine their vision, their initial vision for the blog post. It will be amazing, but then during 1 hour you see that you will not be able to create this amazing vision, to fulfill this vision, and it's a problem which might be blocking you. So maybe you will decide, okay, my initial vision is actually not captured here, so I'm not ready to publish. But the whole idea of those techniques that I told you is that after 1 hour you hit publish, or you even write a script that will publish for you, because otherwise you will try to always cheat and not publish. And the thing with the initial vision is to understand that it's only in your head. No one else knows what was your initial vision. So even though this blog post is still not perfect for your vision, no one knows. It's only you. For others, it's still useful, right? So it's worth publishing. Also, after publishing, you are still allowed to change the blog post, right? All the tools, they allow it. So before you start promoting it as crazy, you can still edit it, and you can do whatever you want. Maybe in the next session you will extend it, but it's important for all of us who are perfectionists, all of us who are easily blocked by the concept, that this is not ready, that we hit the publish and have this closure feeling that I have finished one session and it's there, and it's only for the RSS bots because no one else reads the RSS bots. Okay, let me know in the comments if those techniques are kind of useful or interesting, that maybe you want to try them, and I will follow with the problem of English. I'm not a native English speaker. My English is not really great. My accent is bad, but accent luckily doesn't come through to the writing, right? But the way I write, sometimes it's kind of like Polish, because Polish is my native language. So in short, my English is not perfect. And if you are not from the English-speaking countries, maybe your English is also not perfect, and maybe this is a problem for you. Maybe you think it's something that you need to fix before starting blogging. And this is something that it's very time-consuming to fix it, because your English will never be perfect. Actually, if you're not English, you'll never become the English native speaker if you are not yet one. Probably you don't want to wait 10 years for that. So maybe what you want to do is just accept that your English is good enough to write. You're a programmer. I'm pretty sure your English is good enough to communicate in writing. But there are some tips. There are some ways how to improve your English, regardless for the scope of the blog post. So just remember, no one is there to judge your English. Most of your audience probably is not English native speakers, so they don't care that much about the details. Obviously, it's better to have more correct than not. So first, some very easy ideas. Use an editor which highlights typos. That's the easy one. I use IA Writer on a Mac, but usually almost every editor will highlight. Use Grammarly. Grammarly is the tool which will detect your typical English mistakes. It's very easy to just check the typical problems. I usually have the problem, and that's, I think, typical for the Polish people. So in English you say always a blog post or the blog post, while in Polish we don't really say the a and the. So when we write, we kind of tend to skip those as well. So I have a special round for my blog post for the a-the checks. And if you have typical mistakes that you make in English, then you can easily write your own procedure what you do. The next technique is very important, and it's very popular to fall into this trap of trying to pretend that your English is amazing, and you then write those really long sentences, and those sentences are built from sub-sentences, and there is a very complex structure, and no one else, only you, understand what you actually meant. So whenever you detect a sentence which is like more than 8 words, try to split it into short sentences. So I call it refactor to short sentences. Your content is actually almost like code. You can refactor it. Refactor meaning still preserve the actual message, but you can change the structure, right? So refactoring to short sentences means you just take one long sentences and and split it into very short ones. And it's much more readable, and you will not pretend your English is amazing, but on the other hand, this is much more useful. Okay, let's now switch to the types of a blog posts. The most popular ones and maybe useful ones, but also not that easy to write, so I wouldn't start with them, is to write a guide. The definitive guide to Rails preloading, the definitive guide how to set up Yarn with JavaScript and whatever is the current framework of choice for the JavaScript programmers, or how to connect from Elixir to database. So those are guides. They work well for SEO in the long run, but they are very difficult to write because it's almost like you want to write a book. So I wouldn't start with them. It's a good thing to at some point to work on such blog posts, but I wouldn't start with that. Then you have solving a specific problem type of a blog post. Solving a specific problem. For example, how to connect from Rails 5 to Postgres 8. something like this. So you have very specific thing. You just solved this problem today. You've had to Google it, and it wasn't clear even by googling it. And those kind of blog posts are usually the very short ones. Basically, you are targeting more like people from Stack Overflow or people from just quick Google. They are not there to read the whole essay about it. They just want a quick solution. So maybe just a snippet of code and explanation why it works. So solving a specific problem, I don't know, redirecting Nginx to Tomcat, Groovy and Swing Builder, Rails device and method not found error. Those are specific problems. You just want to solve them. Very, very easy to blog. You can write such a blog post in 10 minutes. Another type is before after. I call it before after because you start with 2 snippets of code. You show the first one, and then you show the second piece of code. And for example, you use the time constraint technique. So you just explain how you changed from the first one to the second one by writing some sentences, by explaining yourself, maybe linking to some design patterns. And this is a good, this is the kind of blog post that I really like, because I like the refactoring, I like to improve the structure, and I feel like I want to share it with with other people. So I often start with before and after. And this is also very, very easy to blog. This is also very very fitting with this idea of blogging to your team, because maybe you want to show it to your team why you did that. By the way, this is also the kind of the blog posts which can be driven by your recent Git commit messages, because in Git commit, you usually explain why you did stuff. So if you go for your today's session of Git log, just look at what kind of changes maybe you did and why you did them. And maybe your Git commit message is actually your initial draft of a blog post, assuming you can share this. Another kind of a post is debugging story. Debugging story is you explain. It's kind of like a story. So explain what was your problem, how there was a bug but you don't know where it was. So they are usually written in a way that they show the chronological explanation of what happened to you. Maybe it's something that you would explain during a stand-up. Maybe you can write it and then share it with the people on Slack. So yeah, so there is like there is some interesting story about how you solve this. So for programmers, it's interesting, right? Another kind of a blog post which I like, I enjoy writing those, is opinion. So I share my opinion about why I think Elixir is not a viable market for businesses. For example, I'm just guessing, don't kill me. Or why you think that the following the newest JavaScript frameworks is not the good idea. So you are expressing your opinion. It might be controversial to some people, so it's good to support it with some arguments, be rational. From my blog, there are examples like Rails is not MVC, which was very controversial because Rails positions itself as an MVC framework. I've had a blog post which was, I think, #1 at Hacker News at some point, which is called "Stop Hating Java," targeting Ruby programmers because the Ruby community grew on the dislikeness of Java. Unit tests versus class tests. So even in the title, I suggested that there is some distinction. Beyond the Rails way. That's another popular of my blog post, which was a very opinionated approach where I say Rails way is not enough. You can write a series of blog posts, but don't do that at the beginning. Don't assume you're writing a series of blog posts because you will get stuck. You will try to be a perfectionist and finish the series because you switch to other blog posts. And this is not a good idea because it's like not to start with. Even me being experienced, my first blog post was in 2006, so I had like 14 years of blogging experience, and I've had maybe 2 series consisting of maybe 2 or 3 blog posts, and I don't think it was actually worth it. You might end the blog post. So now we are switching to another topic. So I have covered those types of blog posts. Let me just remind you what it was. So one type was a guide. Second one was solving a specific problem. Before, after, with the code showing the differences. Debugging story, opinion, and series of blog posts. Now let's talk about call to action, because some of you may have heard about this concept. I wouldn't start with the call to action idea too early at the beginning. Just unblock yourself, just start blogging. Don't think about building your mailing list or trying to convince people to buy your book. At the beginning, this is not worth it. But later you can do something like this. Or if you have, I don't know, you're very active on Instagram and you publish Insta story, you may say, if you like this and you think I'm a nice person, then you can follow me on Instagram. Okay, now let me switch to the next topic, which is planning. How to plan your blogging. I'm not following that much my plans because I usually blog about something that happened today at my work. But I do organize some of ideas for blog posts, and we also share those ideas on the company Slack. So we try to support each other on the company Slack, and we say you can blog about this, or there's a good topic for you, Andrzej, or there's a good topic for you, Pavel. So I keep a list of topics. I did it in Evernote. Now I use Apple Notes. And I link to other blog posts which inspire me, so I can say, okay, maybe I want to write something similar but different. As for planning, maybe it's worth for you that you want to schedule the time slot for your blogging. So maybe you want to use whatever to-do technique you have or calendar, just to say, okay, Thursday from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. I'm blogging and no one can interrupt me. There is the Fieldstone method, which I borrowed from Gerald Weinberg. His book was called Weinberg on Writing. And he says there's this Fieldstone method where you collect stones before you build a fence based on which is built from stones. So you collect those little ideas, maybe links to Git commits, maybe some code snippets, and then you can always look at this and decide, okay, I can choose several pieces from here and I can actually build a blog post. There is Slack-driven blog post concept, where you may have explained something to your team on the Slack channel. You already verbalize your thoughts in a written manner, and now actually what you did is the initial draft. So just copy, paste to the editor and start blogging. This is really a good concept. I'm not sure if Michael is watching this. My biggest inspiration for blogging was Michael, my coworker in London, where I worked at one company. Michael was, for example, pairing with me in the morning, and when we had a lunch break, he quickly went to his computer and he immediately blogged about what we did in a way that wasn't a problem for the company. And within 10-15 minutes, he's had the blog post published. So that was amazing to see. I sometimes... another one from Slack is if your colleague wrote something interesting on Slack, encourage them to wrap it as a blog post, so help each other. Look at what you wrote today on Slack. Does it have some interesting value? Ask your team if this could make a blog post, and prepare a blog post based on what others wrote. So maybe they will not blog about it, but you can blog about what they did. I often find inspiration on Twitter, so if you lack some inspiration or you need some creativeness, you can go to Twitter, follow some people who are from your audience and see what they discuss. And maybe you want to say, hey guys, you're wrong. Then maybe you can do it as a blog post. Okay, now we are getting to the end. Promotion. So as I said, there are publishing is one thing, promoting a blog post is another thing. You can publish. It's in theory it's public, everyone can read it, but before you promote it, no one cares. So at some point you want to have people reading this, and you want to have people like there's no point to just write and no one reads. Like there might be some point, but only at the beginning. Later you want to grow your audience for some reasons that maybe you are more popular, you're building your brand and so on. Sometimes I use a title-driven writing, so I know you can call it title baits or clickbaits, but if you start with a title, it's like already thinking in terms of marketing. So you kind of feel this will go well on some places. Which places? Places like aggregators, so Reddit, Hacker News. Read their rules for posting, because some of them, they don't allow posting your own blog posts. Some of them will agree if you just copy and paste the content, but they don't agree if you just have a link. There are some places where you can easily or you can tweet it, for example. Some of us don't want to promote their own blog posts. This is an interesting syndrome. The problem is, this is a big problem overall. So if you don't want to promote, it means probably that you don't think what you wrote is worth of some value so it's worth the value of 10 minutes for others to read it, or 3 minutes to read it. And it's important to understand that your writing is of value to other developers. Maybe it would be of value to you from 2 years ago, right? So if it's at least this, then there is probably more people like you, because the community of programmers is like doubling every 5 years, as according to Uncle Bob. So there is some point to blog to people, because there's always a wave of new programmers who are following you in your experience, not you like you, but you as the concept of someone who is more experienced. So the more you write, the bigger chance they have to learn something more. So it is of value, so it's worth building your own communication channels like Twitter, Facebook fan page, maybe mailing list, and then write for them. Or maybe it's just for your team and focus on that. For promoting, it's worth to understand that there are tweetable slogans. So each blog post can be explained in 2 sentences. And if it's catchy, then you can make a screenshot of part of the blog post and tweet it. And the people will then decide whether they want to go there or not. CEO is actually an important part of Arkansas blog, but probably at the beginning for you it's not important. But basically, whatever you do, you will, if it's good quality and if it's promoted well, the CEO will be fine. Sometimes. So now I'll talk about the writer blockade or the blogging blockade. Sometimes you just can't start. You stare at the blank screen of your editor, the cursor is blinking, and you just can't start. So there are some techniques how to unblock yourself. For example, start enough times. So don't think about finishing this, about the end of the blog post. Just start writing, and that's it. Now, don't focus about the result that much. The result, the concept of shippable will help you as well. Accept negative feelings and start working. So at the beginning it might feel very weird to work, but then it will be okay. And maybe part of the problem is that you are attaching yourself to the results. So you are kind of making the equation that this blog post is basically you, and obviously you don't want to be evaluated as that this blog post was really bad for you. Okay, I think we are getting to the finish. I covered most of the techniques I wanted to share with you today. Just to summarize, let me just go through you. If you have any questions, now it's a good moment for Q&A. If anyone has a question, I will just repeat what we have just learned. So we learned about deciding who is your audience. It might be past you, current you, future you, your current team, your future team, or maybe deciding that your audience is Ruby programmers or JavaScript programmers or Angular programmers or senior Angular programmers. Based on that, you can find places where those people gather, what they talk about, so you can understand what are the potential blogging topics. Then we talked about where to blog, and stressing the fact that you don't want to write your own blogging engine. And any platform is fine, probably WordPress is fine, or GitHub Pages is fine. We at Arkansas we use Nanook. Then we talked about that it doesn't really matter that much how to call your blog. You can always change it. What's the domain? What's the blog name, blog headline? But if I started with just Andrzej on software. Then we start the most important techniques probably. Then we learned the most important techniques, like start from the middle, shippable. It's always in a way being production ready. So it's kind of almost like continuous deployment, continuous delivery for blog posts. Timeboxing, timebox 1 hour, keep it shippable, and at any time, git commit, git push. In our RKNC blog setup, git commit, git push immediately publishes to production, so I can see it constantly updated. Only you know the initial vision, so don't stress yourself over the fact that you didn't have time to express yourself as you planned to do. No one knows about it. English is a blocker for many of us. Use an editor which highlights typos, use Grammarly. You make a special run for your typical mistakes. For me, it's the problem. For me, it's also refactoring to short sentences. If you have long sentences, no one can understand it. Write short sentences, then start the next sentence. Keep it short. We covered types of blog posts, a guide, solving a specific problem, before, after, debugging story, opinion, series of blog posts. Don't go for series of blog posts. And then we discussed a little bit about how to plan your blogging, like keep a list of topics, schedule the time slot, the Fieldstone method, so you collect the stones. Slack-driven blog posts, so just look what you wrote on Slack today. Maybe it's a good idea for a blog post, and maybe find inspiration on Twitter. And for promotion, think about the title which will click well. Use aggregators like Reddit and Hacker News. Convince yourself that what you wrote is of value, and tweet with some screenshots. People like images. And that's it for today. There are some other topics. Let me know in the comments if you liked it. Oh, Mike asked a question. So if you liked it, ask some questions. I will try to maybe make more such videos. So Milko asked, please can you repeat the refactoring blocks? Probably that was the concept of before and after. So when I refactored some code, there was this initial code which I didn't like because there was an if statement or there were nested ifs. So what I do is I start my blog post with pasting the initial code and the last one, the perfect one or the improved one, and then I have like the space in between those snippets of code. Maybe I will add some sentences as a story. So today I was working on this code and I didn't like this code because of the following reasons, and then I explain the reasons. And then I say, okay, so I followed the Martin Fowler's technique of replacing an if statements with an early guard, for example. And then this code looks like this. So I can show the code in between, and then, or I don't have to, I just explain it in the narration. And then in the end, I show the last version of the code, and I can claim that this is better because of this and this and this. So this is my favorite technique which is connected to refactoring. Some of the code snippets might be obvious that they are better. Some of them might be more like your opinion, but anyway, it is fine. And I think some people will. You can share with your teammates such blog posts, because then they will understand your approach to code. So even if they don't agree, at least they will understand what's your point, why you did it, right? So in a way you can explain yourself. Probably you did it in the git commit message already, but maybe not, and then you can document as a blog post. All right, I think that's it. So thank you everyone for being here. Thanks for your attention. I hope some of you will start blogging. If you start blogging, please tweet or comment here. What is your blog post? Maybe now is a good moment to write your first blog post, because it's like 10 minutes to set up a new blog on WordPress or GitHub Pages or something like that. Don't bother with the details. Then look at your Slack today. Maybe look at your Git log from today. Paste some code, and maybe in 1 hour from now you can send me a link to your first blog post, or not first, but a new blog post. So the main message I want to get to you today is that don't try to be a perfectionist. Value your time, but still deliver something useful. It's better to produce 5 different blog posts than one which will never be published, right? But it's important those 5 blog posts are published. So good luck everyone. I hope you liked it, and see you next time.